Hi all. This is the third video in the series of three. We are doing a book study on literacy and learning centers for the big kids, and this is the actual book that I'm taking this from, and I've had pictures of it on the other PowerPoints, but I thought I would show you that it is an actual book. But today we're going to focus on the centers and what we can do as a teacher in the classroom and focus on the different types of the centers. So let me share my screen here. I'm going to go down to the PowerPoint and we're going to do it from the beginning. I have tried to record this. This is the third time, so I'm hoping this is the charmed recording. Electricity's gone out, the internet's gone out, so here we go. Literacy and Learning Centers for the Big Kids. This is our third in a series of three. And this is where we look at the foundational centers. We've got the teacher-led center, the vocabulary center, reading together, and writer's craft. And as we all know, all four of these things are awesome just looking at them by themselves. Teacher-led center gives you that opportunity to work with your kids, to reflect with your kids, to make sure they're on task, to make sure that they're understanding the material. Vocabulary is an excellent one because she gives you some strategies to use for vocabulary, and there are also all kinds of other strategies out there to work with vocabulary. But I do admit that I have given kids lists of words to define and then to learn and to have a quiz on, and that is a terrible way to teach vocabulary, as Dr. McKnight does point out in this book. Reading together, and that's where the kids get to read together. Remember, they're in groups of 3 to 5, so they are more focused, and that gives confident readers a chance to read, and maybe some of the other not so confident readers can read in front of the other kids and get some constructive criticism without the whole class, looking in. And then writer's craft. This is where we look at writing. And as we know, that's a big part of our job, that we have to get the kids to write in all of our subjects, not only English. So this gives some good feedback on writing. All right, so the teacher-led center. This is where we provide support to students who need additional help. We reinforce a particular skill for the benefit of the group. And reinforcing a particular skill, I can see this really working in math class because they have so many skills that they have to learn. And sometimes when you're reinforcing a skill to one student, and if you have that small group of 3 to 5, then if you're reinforcing that for one, then the whole group benefits from that. And they benefit from that without putting themselves out there. Somebody else has asked the question, but they benefit from it. Provide enrichment opportunities to academically achieving students. And this can go back to the second video where we talked about grouping. And you can group kids according to ability, and you can send the higher achieving kids off on to their, to the centers, but have them doing their own activities that enrich them instead of either holding them back or keeping them status quo. Opportunity to discuss both simple and complex goals. So you have that opportunity, you have them sitting right in front of you, and you know if they understand or if they don't. Students display evidence of their developing mastery and share their work with teachers. And they all like to share their work usually, especially if they've done it. And this keeps those students that don't necessarily always do their work, it kind of keeps them on task and keeps them abreast of what's going on, so they don't have the chance to flounder. Dialogue between teacher and student for descriptive feedback, which is critical to the academic growth of students. So what type of feedback are we talking about here? Where is the student mastering skills and content in their work? What does the student need to do in order to achieve higher levels of skill development? And how will the student attain greater understanding of the relevant content? And you can determine this when you meet with that student in the teacher-led center. use the teacher-led center as an opportunity to conference with students in either small groups or on an individual basis. We all know we have those kids that want to accost you as soon as you come into the room to take roll. They want to know what their grade is, where they're missing, what they're missing, why I haven't turned in grades, or why I haven't entered grades, or blah, blah, blah. All these things they could learn by looking at Schoology, which they have access to in our county. But yeah, we always have all those kids. And this would be a good chance when you're in that teacher-led center to stop and say, hey, this is what you have right now. What are we going to do about this missing assignment? If you want to use your teacher center for that. If you're in a unit towards the end of the unit possibly, and kids are making up work at that point. It's all in how you want to use it. But to me, that's a great opportunity to have them face to face. And if they do have questions while you're sitting there face to face, you can answer them. Use proficiency scales and rubrics to focus on specific skills and content. Rubrics, I don't think they always read them. I don't think they pay attention to them. So a good mini lesson at the beginning of the year is how to read a rubric and why it's important. Because I think they think that's just an extra piece of paper you give them or an extra link you put onto their assignment, and they don't pay attention, which, I mean, honestly, they should. When appropriate, students can also engage in peer feedback during collaboration work in centers. I don't know about you, but I often run into when we have a peer review day, a lot of time is wasted. So with these 15-minute chunks and having to rotate in these centers, I feel like that they're going to use or maximize the time that they have, or at least I'm hoping they do. Classroom management versus teacher-led centers. I wanted to read you a section of text on this. During the early stages of literacy and learning center implementation, colleagues are often anxious about the teacher-led center. The most frequent concern I hear is, I'm worried that the students won't stay on task if I'm working with another group. Even in the most challenging classroom environments, it doesn't take long for the students to become increasingly independent and self-regulated. In order to guide students to work to a desired standard, it is important that teachers are consistent with expectations and norms for center work. Remember my earlier advice, and this is earlier advice in the textbook, that she's always saying that you're the teacher, you are the leader of your classroom, and you know your students best. But she's saying you as the teacher are the best judge of what your students need in the classroom. If you want to transition to the teacher-led center after the students have had some experience working in centers, then by all means do so. However, don't wait too long, because the teacher-led center is one of the keys to the LLC model. So just make sure that you have that teacher-led center, if not at the very beginning, that you've integrated it pretty quickly if you're using this. All right, so let's move to vocabulary. Vocabulary centers are useful, I think, or could be very useful, because I have given kids lists of words. They've found the definitions, they study for the quiz, and then that's it. Do you think they learned anything? No. And Dr. McKnight points that out in her book pretty fervently, that that's no way to teach vocabulary. And honestly, that's the way I've done it. Not all the time in the past, but a lot of time in the past. So using these strategies for vocabulary is really important. Vocabulary, more than any other aspect of reading, presents the greatest challenge to student comprehension. And if we are able to give them the tools to understand these words, why wouldn't we, right? In the Vocabulary Center, students are given an opportunity to focus on activities that develop both academic and content-specific vocabulary. Following are recommendations for effective vocabulary instruction. Limit the number of vocabulary words to 12 to 15 per list. And you could even do less. I would probably, just me personally, would do 10, unless your class is, a higher level, then they could probably handle 15 at a time. Give students an opportunity to practice with each new vocabulary word a minimum of 5 times in order to foster comprehension and usage. 5 times, that's what she said. So we do have to spend that time on vocabulary, maybe with those same words, for an extended period of time, whether it be a week or 2 weeks, just depending. just so they learn those words. And I know we get in a hurry and we want to finish what we're doing and we want to get to the next point. But I think if we maybe take it a little bit slower and they learn these words, then that's all the better for them. Teach vocabulary in context. To put it another way, students need to understand how words are connected. Providing long lists of vocabulary words that are not connected to current content area study is not an effective technique. So if I gave them a list of 10 figurative language words and we're working on sentence structure, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So even if I were preparing them for the next figurative language unit, you want to try to separate those units and not try to move ahead, because if they're not working with those words on a daily basis, then that's not gonna help them. Make sure that the information or skill you're teaching is a small enough chunk so that it fits into a 5-minute mini lesson. Remember that chunking is a really big thing with this text, is that giving them those small bursts of information really helps. Visualization, visualizing words and meanings is critical to internalizing new language. When students are advised to visualize new vocabulary, they are compelled to gain greater understanding of advanced meanings and concepts. Strategy examples are vocabulary chips, vocabulary Jenga, vocabulary slides, list group label, words that are confusing, using confusing word pairs and groups. And I've mentioned here that let me know and I can give you the information on these, but I do want to look at the vocabulary chips because I think they're cool. Using paint chips from Lowe's or Home Depot, and you're using the paint chips that have the 3 colors on them, not just the single chips. But this is vocabulary chips develop students' understanding of synonyms, antonyms, and word relationships. Take some paint chips that you might find at a home improvement store. Using the different colors, students can take a root word and write antonyms and synonyms in the different shaded blocks. The students could also use the paint chips to represent associated words like happy, joyous, delighted, or elated. Paint chips are also a useful tool for grouping related content-specific vocabulary words. I don't know if you can see it or not, but this is the picture of what they've used here with those paint chips. But there are all kinds of different strategies. You can Google strategies, or I can share this book with you and you can get some ideas. All right, finally, to the Reading Together Center. Provide students with choices in their reading. It makes a big difference in motivation. We as educators provide 2 or more texts for students to choose from. Remember, choice is a great motivator for these kids. This not only increases motivation, but also appeals to students of various interests and ability levels. Group students not based on ability, but based on the text they choose. She mentioned different groupings in that last video that I did, but basing it on the text they choose seemed to be her go-to. Reading together in centers gives students the opportunity to develop greater comprehension. Strategies like sticky notes, Cornell notes, GIST, and these are also in the book here. I think we've all probably been, or at least the teachers that I've been around, we've been exposed to Cornell notes. Sticky notes. Sticky notes is a strategy to develop the inner voice that all proficient and independent readers should possess. I always introduce the strategy in this way. When I am reading, there is a voice in my head. As I am reading, the voice in my head may ask questions about what I'm reading, make comments about what I'm reading, and draw personal connections with the text. As I read this text for you, I will stop whenever I have a question, comment, or personal connection, record it on a sticky note, and place it in the text. So that the sticky notes are awesome because kids like the sticky notes usually. And that's true. We all should have that inner voice as we read. So we ask questions, we make comments, or we make connections as we're reading. So that's a really good strategy when they're reading together. I can give you more examples, just let me know. Students should see the strategy modeled and start out with some directed practice prior to using the strategy with greater independence in the Reading Together Center. So in other words, don't just throw them in there with this strategy and say, here you go. You need to go over it with them, model it with them. And we know as teachers that modeling is what we are supposed to do for them to be able to understand what's going on or what we're doing or what we even expect. All right, so the Reading Center wasn't quite as long as the other two, but then we have the Writer's Craft Center. Students work on writing skills that are applicable to the content being studied. When looking for activities for the Writer's Craft Center, consider providing opportunities for students to practice skills that will be needed to produce longer texts. So like I was talking earlier, I think I've recorded this video 3 times, but I think I said this earlier. We teach the introductory, English teachers teach the introduction to, say, a 5-paragraph essay. And that is a stumbling block for so many kids, because I think either they get stuck on the attention getter, what if I'm not getting, doing the right thing, or the thesis statement, or those 3 points that they should write about, whatever it is, they get stuck. So if you can do a writing center on the introduction paragraph, or just maybe the attention getter, or just a thesis statement. You can't ask them to write a whole piece of writing in these centers, because remember, you're just doing that small 15-minute time period. So just having them write one thing, like their thesis statement, will help to get them ready to go on and write the bigger piece. Evidence-based written argumentation. This is the biggest thing that students need to learn, because they're going to have to know it not only in high school, middle school, and high school, but if they go to college, they have to learn it in college, or they have to know how to do it in college, or they have to be able to, in some professions, whether they go to college or not, they have to be able to argue, and they have to be able to facilitate that argument intelligently, and they have to have evidence to prove what they're trying to say. So evidence-based written argumentation is one of the most important. It's foundational for all areas of study. It's used in literary or historical analysis, as well as science reports. So it's everywhere in academic work and future careers. So it's very important. The practice example on page 48. Present students with a picture, photograph, or video, and have them identify the claim and supporting evidence. Present students with a prompt and ask them to craft a written response that includes a claim and supporting evidence. This longer form writing will need to be completed over several literacy and learning center cycles. So if you're writing an essay, you're going to be in these cycles for maybe a week or 2. Combine reading analysis with writing practice by providing students with a text and having them complete this graphic organizer. So there are different graphic organizers. I think I took that from the text, and I'm not sure what graphic organizer there is. Oh, I don't know if you can see it or not. And I will gladly share these graphic organizers with you. I don't know if you can see these or not, but there are all kinds of templates in this book. Graphic organizers to use, things that you can give the kids, written instructions. All of this stuff is in this book, and I highly recommend it if you want to order it, or if you want me to make copies of anything in this book, I can, in my school or maybe an area school. So just let me know. They're very useful, and I think that they would help you implement these centers. This is our last slide, I think. Students should be engaging in clearly focused tasks. Expecting students to write a full essay or composition in the center is unrealistic and counterproductive, kind of what I mentioned a few minutes ago. Again, that 15-minute time frame, providing students the opportunity to practice skills so that they become more proficient. And this 15-minute time frame is pretty much for everything from each center. Anytime you give a student something to do, 15 minutes, that's all you have. And they're going to complain, but hopefully by the end of the year, you'll have them trained where they can focus enough and get into the moment enough where they're going to be able to do these tasks that you ask them to do. Have students practice a specific skill or complete a step toward a larger writing assignment. Like I mentioned, you can get them to do the thesis statement, that attention getter. What 3 points are you going to be writing about? That's a good activity for a one-day center. Students could practice citing texts and sources. We all know that we use MLA in English, but there's also APA, so they can practice the differences. Identify reliable sources and evidence. What can they use for these sources? Hone editing skills. So We can give them those editing marks that editors use. Or, we can have them learn those, and that could be a whole center activity. Anything that helps them along the way, or draft a segment for a larger composition. So at some point you can get them to write that introductory paragraph, but you're going to have to go through those steps to get to that introductory paragraph first. So maybe the last day of the centers that you're working on this introduction, they actually write out the introduction. Now they may need longer, so that's when, they have to maybe take it home or get feedback from you in the teacher-led center of how far they've gotten, how far they need to go. So each of these 4 centers is very, very helpful in its own way. So yes, that is the end of the PowerPoint. And that, I think, is probably the end of this book study. I am going to hang on if I can get back to Teams. And I'll stop sharing so you don't have to look at everything I'm doing. But thank you guys very much for watching these 3 videos. Hopefully you've gotten something out of it. Please let me know if you want copies, anything from the book, if you want ordering information about the book, or if you want to implement this in your classroom and talk to me about it. I am no expert whatsoever, but I am going to try to implement this in my classroom this year, as hard as it's going to be. I am going to try to do that to see how that does, especially with the writing process, with these essays that these kids struggle with. But I really appreciate you attending, and I might do this again. You never know. So have a great summer. Thanks again.